Coming from Central Kentucky, land of horses, bourbon, and basketball, straight to your ears, ChickenCoopGuides.com presents AgriCast Digest, your place to get news and information about anything agriculturally related. Please welcome your host, Gabrielle Yoder.
Hey folks, I'm really excited about today's interview. I've been looking forward to talking to our guest today, Doug Kaufmann. Mr. Doug Kaufmann, welcome to AgriCast Digest.
Well, thank you so much. I'm looking forward to it too.
Awesome. Now, you've had a long-running TV show called Know the Cause. I was introduced to it back in 2005. Can you tell us how and why that started, as well as what channel it's on, so folks with TVs can watch? And I say folks with TVs, I guess that means cable. Our family kind of, our family kind of dipped out of TV and stuff several years ago. But if I want to watch you, I usually go to my mother's house or watch your videos online. So, but could you tell us about that and kind of why you started Know the Cause?
Sure. It can be seen, by the way, in 100 million households via dish and direct, and you can get that information on my website, knowthecause.com. And then I have acquired certain markets. I wanted to be in Los Angeles, where I'm from, New York, Chicago, Philly, Dallas, and so forth. So all that information is on the website. We have grown it. First of all, we didn't think it had 15-year-old legs. When we started it in the year 1999, we had no idea it would be here, I guess, 16 years later. But the public is demanding this. I kept it real simple. I didn't get involved in the financial end of this. I don't have my own products. My accountant keeps hitting me on the head. My gosh, you'd be a zillion if you brought your own antifungal products onto the marketplace. I have found the really creme de la creme, the really good product companies, and they advertise, and those advertising fees cover our buying markets and so forth, and paying the overhead and so forth. So that's how it works. I don't involve myself in any multi-level companies, even though we've been offered huge amounts of money to do that, because I could bring so many of my viewers over. Then somebody ends up with 60 pounds of, garlic in their garage they hope to sell. And so I don't do that. I keep this really, really clean. People can see the show every day on my own website. So in the case of people who only have a computer and don't watch TV, and there's a growing number of people who don't, they can watch a new episode of our show every day on our website. The show is called Know the Cause because we don't. I have worked in so many hospitals with so many great doctors, and they really didn't have a clue that anything but bacteria affect the human body, or the canine or feline body, and cause ill health. But in fact, fungal infections were the first diagnosed infection in the 1800s, and they continue today to be, I think, abundant, and yet doctors really didn't learn this in medical school. So the show is necessary to teach the public.
Yeah, I agree. It was kind of my first introduction to functional medicine, I guess. I got really lucky at an estate sale just before we left Florida. I found two really awesome doctor's books from a doctor that had started his practice back in the 30s or 40s. And one of them was a book that you recommended. It's really difficult to find. It's a microbiology, or there's a couple of really good ones.
And the older ones, do you find that, I have some books from the 20s and 30s. I'm telling you, the answers are in these books. Doctors understood fungus back then. They understood that they didn't have magic chemicals that were heavily promoted for profit. So they had to use diet and a lot of water. Innocence of that time is so refreshing to me as someone who began my career back in the 60s. That was a different time. Today we are hustled out of our minds to take drugs. And, ask your doctor. Of course, if you ask your doctor, that's what he does for a living. He's going to give you that drug. So we have to be careful, and that's what my show expounds on.
Yeah, I definitely am 100% with you on that. It's really interesting for me because I'm actually an herbalist. I consider myself an intermediate because you don't really ever, I don't think you ever become a master herbalist because there's so much study involved. You're going to do it for the rest of your life. But I consider myself an intermediate student herbalist. So I've been studying this for a long time. Those books that you recommended were really incredibly helpful in my own pursuit of knowledge. But also, if you look at the books, the nursing manuals, the doctor's manuals, like you said, from the late 1800s, the early 1900s, people have this kind of fallacy about, modern medicine is the only, the best way there is, and no one is ever known as much about the human body as we know now, which is true to a degree, but it can't negate the knowledge that came before. The Mayo Clinic was doing things like raw milk fasts and things like that were for health back in the 20s.
You would love this, and I think your audience will too. I was cruising through a 1932 book that this doctor wrote, and it was expensive. And I thought, well, before I buy a book, that talks about microbiology, I better see if it has anything on fungus. So I go to the back, and I'll be darned if he doesn't have a chapter on it. So I pay $32 for this old book, and I get home and I start reading it. He's talking about female patients who had meshing going on inside their reproductive organs all the way to their intestines, and then he cultured the meshing. He cut it up and looked at it under a microscope, and it was fungus on 2 different occasions, 2 different kinds of fungus. Wow. Now, you and I today know he was talking about endometriosis, which today we have no idea, but here's 14 drugs. So endometriosis, and he made a point of saying these were sexually promiscuous women. I contend that you can pass, fungus grows on skin of men, and the second we implant it into the right pH and right environment, it begins to grow. And no doctor, no OBGYN will hear me. But this is so important that women understand to be careful, use barrier methods and so forth, because this fungus can cause endometriosis. You never see an 11-year-old girl with endometriosis. You never see an 11-year-old boy with prostate swelling. And that's because these are sexually transmitted syndromes.
That is.
So these old books are invaluable.
That is very fascinating. We could probably talk about that all day.
I know. We could put 2 hours on that.
This is great. So can you discuss any upcoming projects you might have? Now, I know you're not looking to be the next Dr. Mercola with your next doctor, your next Doug Kaufmann brand toothpaste or something, but can you discuss maybe anything you have on your plate, like any new books or any new shows, DVDs, anything like that?
Well, in an effort to attract a younger audience, we have brought in a wonderful young couple from Austin, Texas. He is a workout and exercise physiologist. She is a chef and has her degree in culinary arts. And so they are helping us. They're a 30-something couple. That's very exciting. We announced them on Facebook, and boy, my audience loved it because, it's no longer the geezer show. It's now, we have to prevent, like I was just talking about endometriosis. Young girls and young boys, in their teens and 20s are getting these diseases. Why is my skin always itching? Why am I depressed, et cetera? And that has much to do with the topic we're talking about today, mycology and fungus. So that's one exciting thing. We have 2 new books, The Female Link to Fungus, and one called Overkill, how we're overgoing to doctors, they're overdiagnosing us, over-medicating us, and overkilling us. The PSA test is classic of that. The PSA test is a fungus test, and yet doctors think it's a prostate cancer test, and they have grossly overtreated men and caused loss of everything from, their sex life to their lives by treating them for cancer that wasn't. So we could go, that's a whole nother area. And then finally, my son a year ago is a filmmaker in Los Angeles, and a very good one. And he said, Dad, would you mind if I came in and talked to some of your doctors and some of the people that had these horrible syndromes going on? Because he remembers as a little boy out here in Texas, people calling me at all hours of the night and in the evening. I worked at one of the big hospitals here. And I wasn't the kind of guy who didn't answer the phone. I was always worried somebody was going to, get really sick. So he remembers time when we were playing basketball that I'd have to come in and be on the phone for an hour to talk someone down who was suicidal or something like that. So now Evan is making a documentary that will be out later this year on what I do and what I've done for so many years, and the scientists and the doctors who are standing behind it. And it's a growing number now, so that's exciting.
So are you planning, now I'm sure that you've heard of Dr. Campbell McBride.
Sure.
So are you going to be covering the nutritional aspects as well, or you just kind of refer to a little bit to that as well? Or
to the extent that fungus parasitizes man, diet is intimately involved in this. In other words, you must eat what fungus hates, because if you have fungus on board and you eat what it likes, it will rapidly multiply inside your body. And the little breathing problem today will become lung cancer 5 years from now. So you really bring up, and I'm so glad you're an herbalist because that helps. There's a book I own. It's one of those very expensive books on it's called Plant-Derived Antibiotics. Few doctors know that coriander and onion and garlic and thyme, to name a few, are antibiotic. So they kill not only the fungus, but the poison it makes, the mycotoxin that it makes. And they're so much more valuable to us than diflucana and nystatin and all of these drugs that we give people for yeast infections. So, God didn't make any mistakes. What's in the garden has the answer to it. It's not what's in a pharmacy. Very often those can be life-saving, but then the damage done by antibiotics, et cetera, we have to sop up later with some of these things that are in the garden. Our diet, chlorophyll. Fungus hates chlorophyll. So the more green leafy vegetables we can juice or get in our diet, the more antifungal properties they have.
Yeah, that's good to know. I was a child of the 80s, so, antibiotics were, bubblegum medicine, it was given every time you looked funny or sneezed. It caused a lot of damage to my generation and the ones just before and after. I think doctors are now a little bit more hesitant sometimes, to give antibiotics. I know our doctor's really good about that. Yeah, he's just like, well, he's a little more conservative with, dispensing.
Good. They're having to do that. Antibiotic resistance by their own prescription pad is causing a lot of illness now. We've grossly overdone something that finally worked in medicine, antibiotics. And so it works so well, we think people need to take it prophylactically in our drinking water. And that's just crazy, but that's the way science thinks.
Yeah. I've heard a lot of interesting things of how to medicate our water supply, like lithium or, fluoride technically is a medication that they're putting in our water supply. And then there's all the stuff that people flush down the drain. So yeah, it's, we've got a really good water filter. I'll tell you that.
Exactly. Good.
And I wrote down the name of that book too. I'm going to go look it up later, because I remember when I tried to do the GAPS diet for the first time, we didn't prepare ourselves well enough, I guess, because everyone else did okay, but I think I have a lot of candida or fungal overgrowth, and I was just shaking and couldn't stay awake. And so I'm preparing, we're preparing ourselves again after we move to give it another try. So
good. You need to do that. You never totally kill this stuff. Doctors don't know that when you die, here's how strong fungus is. It'll eat your bones, it'll eat your organs, it'll eat your eyes, it'll eat your scalp. Fungus lives in our body, and it is the organism that deteriorates us. Currently, fungi are saprophytic. They eat dead or decaying material. They eat logs, and leaves and so forth. But when we die, they eat us. And so it's keeping them at bay for 90 years, to live a healthy life. And that's what I'm all about.
Yeah, that's good. I agree with that. Now, what I really wanted to talk to you about, since we are, I kind of look at this show as like covering the human animal, or all animals, including humans. That's why natural health and organic gardening and things like that kind of go with this program. But I really wanted to talk to you about the food supply today. And we all know that there's a lot of problems with it, but very few people are really talking about solutions, like practical solutions. And I was hoping you could kind of give our listeners an overview of the problems and effects of many grains like corn, wheat, and soy, and what kind of small farmers and just regular people can do to avoid that when feeding themselves and their animals.
Yeah, which is such a good question. Thank you. We have ppms, parts per million, or ppbs, parts per billion, of allowable mycotoxins. And the best way I can tell you what a mycotoxin is, fungi emit a poison. It can be a gas, a solid, a liquid, etc. It's invisible, but this gas is poison, and that's what's important. That's the take-home message. I think the two things that are most important today in our understanding of diet nutrition are that fungal mycotoxins exist in our grain supply, mostly in corn and peanuts, according to Dr. Ruth Etzel. She's a PhD MD who wrote in the Journal of the American Medical Association, and I think it was circa 2001 or 2002, that our grain supply in America, our cereal, our bread, our bagels, our pasta, is commonly contaminated with these fungal poisons. So the more we eat, the more weight we gain. What makes bread rise? Yeast. So the more of this we eat, the sicker we get, and yet, then the problem is looking at the result and believing it's the cause. Now we have gluten-free. Well, 1 million people have gone off wheat and they feel great and they think they're gluten sensitive. That is nonsense. They have gone off wheat. They're now not eating mycotoxins and they're feeling great. So they're right on their approach. They're wrong on their diagnosis. So the second thing is genetically modified organisms. Few people understand this deeply, but in the Old Testament of the Bible, it says time after time, with fruit of like kind in it. In Genesis, I'm giving you every green plant with seed of like kind, not fruit, with seed of like kind in it. So what has man done? Gone directly to Genesis and said, let's do the opposite. Let's make a tomato look like, sound like, and have the crunch of an apple. Or let's put immunizations in pears. This isn't right. We're not supposed to be doing that. But to make matters worse, these fungal mycotoxins can also alter the DNA of plants. I mean, this is fascinating. I don't know if you're familiar with Doug Gill's, University of Maryland, but fungi alter the reproduction of the catchfly plant.
Wow.
So he exposes all these catchfly plants to fungus, and pretty soon the pollen they make is fungus. It's no longer catchfly plant pollen. And so we have to understand that if we're eating a grain-free diet, we have pretty good chance of avoiding daily contamination with these mycotoxins. And if we're eating greens like spinach, Brussels sprouts, chlorella, green leafy vegetables, broccoli, then we're offsetting the damage done by the mycotoxins we are eating. Isn't that fascinating?
That is really cool. I was just thinking, Invasion of the Body Snatchers with that whole thing with the fungus and the pollen. That's really, wow. I can't believe it does that.
And Dr. Janice Moore wrote in Scientific American magazine decades ago, fungi alter the behavior of their host. So you and I start craving the very foods that they demand.
Carb
They'll take you down. Right, exactly. And it gets so deep. Fungi alter the human immune system in their own favor. In a symbiotic relationship, fungi are always the dominant partners. I mean, these little buggers are bad. I mean, biblically speaking, fungus and sin are one and the same. In the Old Testament, there's 32 references, derogatory references to yeast. Don't be like the yeast of the Pharisees.
Wow.
Don't be idiots. There's 32 references, and so the Theopedia, kind of the Bible of the Bible, the encyclopedia of the Bible, says in the Lord's time, or in Jesus' time, fungi was as evil as sin. And so this is so fascinating. The deeper you get in this, the weirder it becomes. The study is just amazing. It's fascinating. It really is.
Wow. And I was just thinking, because I just recently had a baby. Generally, I have a bit of PPD every time.
Oh,
and so
congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah, he was number 4. Not recent, but he'll be a year old soon.
Yeah.
But I've noticed that I start craving carbohydrates during that period of time. Very much, just there's so many serotonin receptors in the GI tract. I think there's 95% of the body's serotonin receptors are in the GI, correct? And then I think 5% in the brain. So to think about all the fungal overgrowth that most people commonly have with the Western diet, and people that were raised with a standard American diet, and then you think you're putting fungus or yeast or all this overgrowth, and then there's also SIBO and dysbiosis and yeast, and then you're putting it in the area where people, their moods are based, happy and sad, and ups and downs. It makes a lot of sense that so many people are so even just psychotic, schizophrenic. It makes sense that the GAPS diet can really solve a lot of problems. Or, I think your phase 1 and, other similar diets can change that.
Sure. That's what it's all about, is no matter what diet, Mediterranean, call it what you want, the ketogenic foods that starve fungus allow the body's immune system to repair. It allows the weight to be lost. It allows the muscle tone to grow back. I mean, it's just, I've been able to challenge this through the 44 years I've been in this field. I came back from Vietnam as a medic in 1971. I was 21 years old. And my diet, what's a guy's diet at 21 years old, right? Bologna sandwiches, beer, and tons of cookies and alcohol and so forth.
Yeah.
And man, I think the yeast, I had horrible jaw, which of course I did have a fungal condition. Then I just put the salt on the potato chip, right? Then I go home and drink like a 6-pack of beer a week, only to serve that fungus just running through my body. So it was ugly, and I had to use myself as an experiment. I got depressed. My skin started bleeding. I put on a ton of weight, and when I started understanding all of this, my boss at USC Medical School, Dr. Hughes, said, "Man, you look good today." And I said, "I don't know why, but I'm feeling good." "Well, have you had any beer?" "No, I stopped last week." So it took me a while, as a 21-year-old guy, to put one and one together that, oh my gosh, when I eat the cookies and the bread and the beer and the candy, I bloat and I get depressed. I want to cry. So this is what I'm hoping people listening to this podcast will understand, that in clinical medicine today, we discount diet, because I'll be darned if diet doesn't prevent the need of most medications. Sometimes medicines are essential. If my blood pressure is 300 over 200, I'm going on a medication, but only until I can realize why it went up. That's right. I moved into a moldy basement. It smells like mildew. No wonder I'm gaining weight, and my blood pressure is up. So people need to go back. Were you on lots of antibiotics? Were you craving carbohydrates when you get out of the shower? Does your skin itch and itch and itch? Fungus loves heat and comes to the surface for heat. So you start putting one and one together, and you realize a whole lot of us have dietarily induced fungal conditions, which are causing neurological problems or kidney problems, and we're running off to kidney or brain doctors, and they don't know. They don't have a clue about mold, mildew, and fungus and the symptoms that might ensue. A doctor learns in medical school that yeast, vaginal yeast is a problem, and that ringworm is a problem, and that toenail fungus is a problem. They don't know it can get into your heart and cause atypical beating. They don't know it can get into your brain and cause suicidal depression. They don't know, so that's why outlets like yours are so important to teach.
Well, thank you. I think this is important too. I mean, once I started reading the books that I had gotten from that estate sale, I was like, why don't they teach this in medical school anymore? It's crazy. And they went so far into the allopathic model of, everything has a drug. You can make a drug for everything. I mean, it's kind of like, I was just talking to Tom Naughton. He did that documentary Fathead, and he discussed how the lipid hypothesis back in the 50s, which is a flawed hypothesis, completely changed the face of Western, a standard American diet, and more of those grains. And, and it was around the time you came back from Vietnam is when this was going on.
And you know what drugs are? Most people don't know this. My friend Dr. Costantini with the World Health Organization educated me on this. Statin drugs were leftover antifungal drugs. There was a glut of them on the market, and someone did human research back in the 70s and said, whoa, these drugs are lowering blood cholesterol. And so all these brilliant cardiologists sat around and said, well, will that save lives? Sure, because cholesterol surely causes heart attacks. Of course, we know better today. But the bottom line is statin drugs became the darlings of Wall Street, not of us, but of medicine. And so many people are taking them now, but isn't that interesting that the reason they lower triglycerides and cholesterols is because they have strong antifungal properties.
That's really interesting.
They were antifungal drugs before it became Lipitor.
That is interesting.
Isn't that fascinating? So it's not killing a whole lot of people. It's causing leg pain and all sorts of side effects, but it's not killing them because it kills fungus. So they think these are the darlings of Wall Street. Of course, we're having more heart attacks today than we did 20 years ago. They don't look at those stats. They look at the money stats. It's making billions of dollars for drug companies.
Oh, yeah. That's just, I always generally just just follow the money. I'm pretty cynical when it comes to that.
Exactly. I'm cynical too. I'm sorry.
Yeah, after you've seen enough stuff. And my mother, she used to work in a hospital when I was a kid and came home and told me all the stories about the horrible things that the doctors had said that day about their patients. And I was just like, oh my gosh.
I know.
Really?
No, isn't that wild?
Yeah, but then if it wasn't for the fact that we moved to Kentucky, we got an absolute awesome darling of a humble, wonderful doctor. You know, I probably would still feel the same about the medical community as a whole. And now I've kind of got a little bit more hope that, you know, there's some out there that really do care about their patients and they do want to learn about this kind of thing. And they're really, you know, they just don't know where to go, I think, or...
Well, they're ostracized.
Yeah,
if you and I step out and question it, we're not ostracized. We don't lose our license to print money if we question anything that we learned in school. 40 years ago, they do. They darn well better prescribe a lot of drugs, and then they, win Doctors of the Year, and they're in magazines, and they're in medical schools. We're in a heck of a fix in America today. That's why herbologists, that's why iridologists, that's why homeopathists learn the way they learn, and more people, much to the dismay of the medical community, more and more people are seeking people who know the facts instead of those who know the pharmacology. And it's really an exciting time. My last physical exam was the day I exited from the military in 1972. I have not been to a doctor, and I'll soon be 66 years old. I really don't trust the second I go in there, somebody's going to take my blood pressure and say, oh, you need this. And somebody's going to pull blood out and say, oh, 201 cholesterol, you're going to die of a heart attack, and they're going to put me on this. I don't play games. I don't want to do that. I don't trust, and so I avoid. Now, having said that, if you're listening to this as a first runger, this is all brand new to you, keep up with the doctors. Just be careful of the medications they give you, because it takes somebody like us, you and I, a lot of years to learn that sometimes the upset tummy and the skin itching and depression are dietarily based, or it's due to like you said, dysbiosis in the gut, and you need probiotics after antibiotics. So if you're brand new at this, don't just stop medications and stop seeing a doctor. Rather, take the next 5 years and really dig in and learn.
Yeah, because I actually ran into someone. They wound up going to the hospital because they found out all this stuff and they just quit cold turkey. I think they were on an antidepressant and some other things, and it just you can't do that. You just have to be weaned off.
You've been listening to AgriCast Digest. If you like what you just heard, please share with your friends. And don't forget to go to ChickenCoopGuides.com/podcast to download transcripts and archives of this episode, as well as take advantage of any freebies or trials offered in this episode. You can then visit our private podcast Facebook page, also linked there. This has been a Bluebird Media production.